When I write code, I generally like to have a tight feedback loop to know if what I'm writing makes sense or not. I do this by either writing tests and running them while writing code, or by running the code itself directly. When I'm constantly looking at the output of the code, that assures me that the code that I'm writing makes sense and works. So because of this, I usually end up switching between the shell and the editor all the time. So I thought, why not build a Vim plugin that lets me do this without ever leaving the editor. I know there are a lot of plugins that solve exactly this, but I'd never built a Vim plugin before, so I wanted to build one myself this time. I know you can also do this within the inbuilt terminal of neovim, but I wanted to do this in a way where with a simple key mapping, it should show me the output of the code that I'm writing, or the output of the test that I want to run. So I started building a plugin. But the problem with this plugin was it was really difficult to explain how this plugin works in the form of text. So the README was not really helping people understand how this plugin works and what it's actually capable of. So I thought it's better to make a video demoing how it works. So yeah, check it out and let me know what you think about it. You can find the plugin on my GitHub. I will drop a link to this in the description. It's written in Lua like most of the modern neovim plugins. One thing to note about this is it does not work on Vim, it works only on neovim. It'll work regardless of whether you've maintained your configuration in Vim script or Lua, but it only works with neovim. Installing this plugin is pretty straightforward. It's like any other plugin. If you're using Vim plug like me, all you have to do is copy paste this line in your config file. Okay, now let me dive right into how to use this plugin. So I'm going to start off with two very simple use cases of what this plugin can help you achieve. So let me start off with a very simple use case of this plugin, that is running the file that you're currently working on. So as soon as you install the plugin, you get a couple of commands that you can run. One of them is flow run file. So when you run that command, you can see that the code that is in this file is executed and the output is displayed in the message window of your neovim. This is useful, but a cool thing about this plugin is you can also selectively run code. That is, you can select a very specific snippet of your code that is valid and syntactically correct and run this command called flow run selected. So you can see that only the word world is printed and hello is skipped. So you can also do that for any snippet. As long as it is valid, it will run. So yeah, selectively running code is specifically helpful when you're writing scripts and you only want to execute some part of the code without having to run the entire script. So by default, as you can see, the output is shown below here, but you can also configure this to be displayed on a buffer. So let me walk you through how to do that. So first of all, I'm not going to run the command every single time. So I've mapped these commands to shortcuts. So when I press leader R, it runs the selected text, or leader RR to run the entire file. You can add this snippet of code to configure the output to be displayed on a buffer. You can say buffer equal to true and then specify a split command. I'll come to the split command a bit later, but when you set buffer equal to true, it will start displaying the output in a buffer. Now when you run this file, you can see that the output is displayed in a separate buffer, split vertically. By default, the buffer that you're currently writing code in will stay in focus, but you can go to the buffer where the output is displayed and interact with the output text. You can either copy stuff and paste it somewhere else or modify it. So even if you modify the output, as soon as you run something else, the buffer will be overridden with the new output. Now coming to the split command, what you see here is a standard Vim split command that can be used to split buffers. If you say split here, the buffer gets split horizontally. If you say vsplit, it splits vertically. Additionally, you can also specify the ratio with which you want to split. So like here I've said 80 vsplit, which means that, I don't know, it divides the screen into some ratio and splits it accordingly. I'm not sure how this number exactly works. Let me make this 50. Okay, so I guess this is the size of the buffer. So basically what the plugin does is it takes the command that you've specified here and runs it for printing your output. Now let's get into slightly more complicated use cases. So I recently introduced a feature called flow launcher, which is another command that you can see here, which opens up a telescope interface. What this does is it lets you define named custom commands that you can run either on top of the file that you're currently working on or just a general command. So before we get into how to use flow launcher, let's get a few prerequisites out of the way. You will need to have Telescope installed. Telescope is a plugin that lets you create amazing fuzzy finding interfaces. Once you have that, you can run flow launcher command that will show you a telescope interface. So it says custom command, and by default there is nothing in it. Let's create a simple command to see how this works. So I'm just going to say ABC as a test for the lack of a better name. So since ABC doesn't exist, it will open up an empty buffer and let me type code in here. And this code is basically bash, as you can see the file type here. So I could say echo and hello world and save it. As soon as I save, the buffer goes away. Now when I run flow launcher again, I can see ABC now. So when I hit enter on ABC, it will actually execute the command that I just wrote and show us the output in the message window. Just like with the other commands, I've set up key bindings for flow launcher also. I've mapped it to leader RT. Hitting Control E on the command will give you the same interface again. You can modify the command and save. Few extra helpful commands are run last command and last output. So in the telescope interface, Control E lets you edit the command. If you do Control D, it will delete it. So let me open up a slightly more complicated code than this to demonstrate some use cases of the flow launcher. So I have an add function here, which obviously doesn't implement add correctly, but I'll get to that in a second. Running this file will actually execute this Go code and print the result. This is useful, but you don't always end up running the code. You also might want to run the test. I have tests written for this add function, so maybe I want to run the test instead of running the code. Let me quickly complete this test. So this will just assert that 1 plus 2 should be equal to 3. How you would generally run this test is by going to the terminal and type in go test, and it will show you that the test is failing. Now the other way is to run the test through custom commands. So you go back to the telescope interface and let's create a command called test. Here we can type the exact same command that we did there. I'm going to add a -v to make the output verbose. So now by hitting Control T and then pressing enter, you can see that the test is executed and you can see the output here. So now let's go ahead and complete this function, a plus b, and you can see that now the test is passing. So you can see how quickly you can iterate over your code and keep running the tests while you do it. So like I mentioned earlier, there is also run last command, so you can use this instead of always going to the telescope interface. So here's another interesting use case of custom commands. So I have this function here called get dashboard, which returns a huge JSON object. This is supposed to be a Grafana dashboard. You don't have to worry about what that is. Let's just say that there is some function that does some magic to generate a big JSON object. So when you run this file, you can see this huge JSON object printed here. It's not really easy to skim through this and see if this is the desired output that you want. So if you do this on a terminal, you would generally use tools like JQ to filter out the specific fields of JSON that you're concerned with. So you can similarly use JQ with custom commands as well. Let's go through the steps of doing that. So you open up the custom command launcher again. Let's say we want to print only the title of the Grafana dashboard panels. Again, for this tutorial, you don't have to know what Grafana is or what a panel is. I'm just going to call this command titles. So it opens up the editor. Now, firstly, you have to execute this script before doing any filtering. So you say Python, and generally you would use the name of the file, but there is always the issue of relative path or absolute path. What this plugin does is it gives you a bunch of environment variables to use that can help you write these custom commands. I'll get to what other environment variables are available, but for now let's stick with the name of the file. So if you say $cur file, this will actually refer to the current file name and take care of the path for you. For now, let me just save this and run the custom command to see if it works. So I go to titles. Yeah, now you can see that the JSON is being printed, which is the output of the code. So let me just go back to this titles and edit it. Now I can pipe the output of this to JQ and filter out exactly what I want. So there is a dashboard object inside the root, and that has rows, that there are multiple rows and each row has a title. So let me save this and run the command again. Now you can see that only the titles of the panels are printed, which is random panel 1 and 2. Let's say you're working on this function that generates Grafana dashboard. So instead of looking at the entire output, you can only look at the titles and tweak the part of the code that generates this title and iterate over that. The possibilities of this are endless. Let's say you have an HTTP server and you want to constantly make curl commands to it while you make changes to the server. So you can create a custom command that runs curl, and you can use grep on top of the curl output and literally anything else that you can imagine. Now let me just get back to the environment variables that I mentioned earlier. So if you go to the custom command section of the README, you can see that two variables are available to you out of the box. One is cur file, which we just saw, which will give you the path to the current file that you're editing. There's also pwd, which gives you the current working directory. So maybe in the future, more standard variables can be added here. If you have any ideas of what variables I can add here, please let me know in the comments. Apart from these, you can also define your own custom variables. So if you scroll down a bit, you can see an example of how to declare custom variables. So you can see that you can name a variable and then assign a value to it. The same variable will be available to you while defining the custom commands. You can also see that you can define a variable with a function. The advantage of this is the value of this variable will actually be determined at runtime. Whenever you run the custom command, this function will be executed and the output of this will then be assigned to the variable. This is pretty powerful because you could literally write any code in this function, or you can make an HTTP request or run another shell command, or literally any logic you want. Let me just copy this snippet and give you a quick demo. Let's try to print the value of some of these variables. Now when I run this command, you can see the value of all of these variables. So yeah, that's basically how this plugin works. I've not covered in detail all the configurations. This plugin is still under development. You can feel free to contribute to it if you're into Vim plugins and Lua in specific. Let me know what you think about this and how you are planning to use it, if at all you are. Go to GitHub and give me a star. That will help promote this plugin. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.